Welcome to the 42nd episode of the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, we'll be speaking with Joe Pizzo, a longtime English educator and recent award winner. Joe has quite the resume. We were just talking before we started the recording, and I realized that he is probably one of the busiest people that I have ever met. He is about to begin his 47th year in the classroom. He works in Chester, New Jersey, and was recently named the 2020 National Educator of the Year by the Association for Middle-Level Education. He's also been named Educator of the Year or similar titles from a few other organizations, has served as president for the New Jersey Council of Teachers of English in the past. And I don't know, we could just spend, a half hour just on your resume. So I'll leave it there and just say thank you for joining me and sharing your perspectives. How are things going for you in New Jersey, getting ready for your school year?
Well, we're on a hybrid model. So we have one cohort one day and the other cohort the other day. And those who are not in person are home. And then we just flip it for the next day.
Yeah, that's what originally we were floating in Loudoun County where I work. In Clark County, Virginia, where I live, they're doing the hybrid. So some students are all online, but everyone else has the hybrid option. And so this has been a tricky transition. I think there's some cool stuff going on, but this has been a little difficult. We just finished our first week of school. Maybe, I don't know if this is a mean question, but I think it's an obvious one. You're rolling into your 47th year teaching.
Yeah.
And we're going into all this hybrid model, distance learning. Are you crazy? Why didn't you retire this year? It seems like the prime opportunity to exit. So how do you feel about the hybrid model and sort of what has kept you around? Because I know a lot of people a lot younger than you looking to get out of school right now. So how are you looking at this as a veteran teacher?
I can tell you that I had been asked, why don't you retire, for maybe the last 15 years or so. And I usually say, I enjoy what I do. And I tell all my students, when you choose a profession, choose something that you're going to not have to feel that you're going to work every day, that, oh, what a drudge. Oh my gosh, I can't really survive this. Go somewhere where you'd like to be, somewhere where you feel you can make a difference, and somewhere where you can smile and get smiles back to you. The kids keep me going. They give me a lot of energy. I've had people ask me, what do you do for a living? And I say, I teach English. Oh, what grade? 7th. And they start patting me on the arm saying, oh, you poor man. No, I'm very fortunate. And I tell the kids, I could be doing other things, I'm sure. But being here with you is what gets me up in the morning. Being here with you is what makes it all worthwhile for me. To see that moment when you finally get a concept into your mind that you understand and you get that aha moment. Well, there isn't anything to describe that. There's a satisfaction. I can tell you that I worked with a young lady from 6th grade on. She came to my writing club after school all through 6th grade. I had her in my class last year in 7th grade. Came to my writing club until COVID sent us all home. And now this year, I tutored her over the summer and continued on throughout the school year. And I asked her to get her mom a couple of weeks ago to put her on our conference. And I said to her mom, I am overjoyed to work with Katie. This is an opportunity for me that just gives me a thrill. This young lady has gone from a reluctant, very measured writer to someone now who has conversations with me as if we're peers. I'll say to her, I'm not sure that you want to use this line. Can you explain to me why you did this? And she does. And if she thinks the line sounds better, she'll say, I like the sound of it. And I'll stop and say, did you hear what you just said? Because that's my point all along. I always cite the book Sound and Sense by Lawrence Perrine. And I read that book when I was in college. And Perrine used a lot of poetry to prove the point that it's not just the sense of the words that make the point, but it's the sound of them as well. Textbooks sound different than poetry, than novels, and so on, advertisements. And she has that willingness now, and I think she has that insight to listen to one of her pieces and say, I wonder if, I like this. Or, I'll ask her open-ended questions saying, okay, what did you think of this line? And she'll say, well, it's okay, but I think I really need to do more. Right? What would you like to do with it? Well, I'm not liking the description a whole lot, and maybe we can shift that around a little bit. Okay, go ahead and tell me where you want the improvement to be. And she does. And then we discuss that, and I'll say, all right, take a moment and see if you can rewrite that. And I watch her, and I see her deep in thought. And then she goes in and she does what she has to do. And sometimes it'll happen on the first try. Sometimes it'll take a couple of tries. But she eventually gets there. And I tell her, I'm beaming. You just gave me a gift that nobody else could give me. I saw you conquer one of the challenges to a writer. How do I make this piece better? And that's a thrill. That's an absolute thrill.
Yeah, well, and especially there where you get to build the relationship and work together over an extended period of time. Like I also do some private tutoring. It's basically how I pay for daycare bills and stuff. I actually, a few weeks back, I spoke to Mike Bergen and Amy Seeley, and they run a podcast, Test and the Rest. And so I talked with them on theirs about how I like, my favorite thing to tutor is college admissions essays, because you're at a point where, for most of the kids, certainly not everyone, but most of the basic skills are more or less taken care of. And so we really end up talking a lot about what you just said, like finding your voice, because unfortunately, I think the way a lot of people teach, I want to say English, but maybe history, just school in general, is we tend to overemphasize sort of the formula, write the basic 5-paragraph essay. And it's not that that's a bad place to start. It's just a bad place to stay. And so I think what ends up happening is, in trying to get that basic sort of writing format together to score well on a standardized test or whatever, we sort of beat kids' voices out of them. Like, young kids write and talk with enthusiasm. And then somehow, sometimes that disappears, and then the trick is at the end of high school, where I teach them, is to try to bring it back. And I think if you have good teachers and good tutors along the way, like you were just talking about, you never have to lose it. Like that's something you continue developing. And if this young lady's having that conversation in 8th grade, then she's going to be in very good shape by the time she's in 12th grade, or, maybe more importantly for the rest of her life. You've been at this for a long time. And I know you said you do the drama club as well. What do you see? Like I just referenced, writing sort of for the test and things like that. And I think we can all agree that a lot of that is regrettable, whether the tests are purposeful or not. Teaching too, it's probably not always the right thing to do. What do you see in terms of the changes throughout a 47-year career? I just started my 15th year, so I'm way behind. Like I've done it long enough, I think, to be called a veteran teacher or close to it, but yeah, I'm way behind. What's your sense of like the changes throughout your career? Like, are the kids different? Do you think the students have changed, or is it the school around them that's changing?
I think there are changes in all aspects. I think the kids are overscheduled right now. I think that they are so involved with this and that and whatever, and I want to do this and I want to try that. And it's great that you have a lot of experiences, but I think they have to have a balance. You can't waste away your youth trying to be young. I think you have to just be young. You have to let it come to you. You don't have to have a planned event. You can just go somewhere and have some fun. You can get a couple of friends together. As kids, my dad was our Pony League baseball coach. And so I had the equipment home, and a bunch of us would meet up at the ball field, and we'd make sure we had 18 guys. If we didn't, we had to close off a field, and we would divide up and we'd play a game. And at the end, I would take the equipment home on my bike. And it was that kind of event, I think, that gave me an appreciation of not necessarily spontaneity, but being able to facilitate things like that. Now, I know that a lot of kids today wouldn't want to do something like that because they might need the adult supervision. The dangers in the world today far exceed what they did when I was a kid.
Do you think that's true?
Well, yeah, I remember people not locking their doors in their homes.
Yeah.
And now
I,
that's different.
I have that conversation with my parents a lot because, it obviously depends locally where you live, but on the grand scale of things, in most places, certainly not everywhere, but violent crime and serious property crime are near all-time lows. And so I think sometimes kids are safer than they've ever been. We still have to worry about abductions, all that stuff, but in terms of the rates at which these things happen, they all happen less. But I can't figure out if they happen less because we think they happen more. Everyone's more cautious, and as a result of being more cautious, the numbers go down. But I think whether kids are or aren't actually safer, I think we have that sense that they need the supervision, and that's something that came up in a podcast 2 different times. Actually, talking with people who are into unschooling, basically just pull the kids out, give them a free run, give them access to materials, and let them pick what they want to learn. And there was a lot of talk about that, the need for more unscheduled time. And I would agree. I think that's the biggest change that I've seen, even in my 15 years of teaching, is my students do not have very much free time. And when they do have free time, it seems they don't really know what to do with it. Hey, we're going to go play a game. There's a lot of random sitting around. And I feel like kids don't know what to do when they aren't told something to do. Is that our fault?
I don't know that we can lay blame on anyone, but I remember as a kid having the drills where we all got under the desk in case, oh my gosh, an atom bomb came, which never would have been prevented by ducking underneath a desk. You just would have been crushed. Yeah. But in this day and age, we're fighting a pandemic that didn't happen in a similar way fewer than 100 years ago with the Spanish flu. And now we have kids. I think there are a lot of fears that we didn't have to face as kids. We had shootings in schools over the past few years, and those have been devastating. With the hybrid model now, there were people who were asking us to take the kids out more, put them outside in their classrooms. But a year ago, we were having lockdowns. And what do we do if a shooter comes by? So these things weren't even thought of when we were kids. It was, don't take candy from a stranger. If a car slows down, just get out of there as fast as you can. And you would walk into town, and people, if they didn't recognize you, for the most part, didn't really give you a hard time. But I really feel terrible that we have kids now who are, I think, a little bit overwhelmed by the unknown. We don't know where the next challenge is coming from. Is it going to be something similar to a pandemic? We deal with a pandemic and we get mixed signals, and sometimes the signals change on a daily basis. Do this, don't do this. I was in a bank this summer, and I went in with a mask. And as I was standing in the bank waiting for the gentleman, I had to make the appointment ahead of time, waiting for the gentleman I made the appointment with to come over and invite me to his desk, I looked around and said, oh my gosh, when I was a kid, you saw people in masks in banks and you ran because they were robbing the place.
Now you can't get in with that one.
Right, exactly. It just flipped the whole situation.
Yeah. It is weird. And sometimes I wonder how much of this is thinking about its effect on students, on young people. I don't know that we have that much more uncertainty in the world, because like you pointed out, I'm just old enough where for the first few years of elementary school, I did the duck and cover turtle drills, for what if a nuclear bomb drops. And where I grew up in Pennsylvania was sort of centrally located. I grew up near 3 Mile Island, and there were 2 major military bases for, so we were actually a place that people were actually worried about that. And so, but then I think Columbine happened, I want to say it was maybe my sophomore or junior year of high school. And so I went from the duck and cover at the beginning of school to the end of my high school career was, well, now we've got to run these, lockdown drills and evacuation. What do we do? And sometimes I just feel like it's the same thing, like you said, the desk wasn't really going to save you, but it's just letting you know, hey, there's a plan in place. The adults around you, someone's in charge, someone has a plan. We're going to try to take care of you. And not that a lockdown drill can't work, but I think sometimes we're doing the same thing. It's just sort of impressing upon the children that there is a plan. I don't know that there's more uncertainty in the world. I think maybe we just see it more. Like, I think we're so oversaturated with media and social media and the rest. I think maybe kids are more aware of some of these things than they have been in the past. I think, like, my grandfather was born in 1900, so he lived through the Spanish flu, 2 world wars, the Cold War, like all this stuff. And you got to think that guy had plenty of uncertainty and trouble in his life. But I bet his kids didn't know about it the same way that kids today know about the things their parents are facing. Do you think that's fair? Like, that our awareness has changed maybe more than the problems themselves?
I think it's a fair observation. I don't know that it's fair to the kids to be in that kind of situation, but life doesn't always allow you to choose the situation you're going to be in. And I think they face challenges with the fact that I remember being in high school when the Vietnam War was going on and college, and you could sit at your dining room table with a portable television and you could see the war going on for the first time almost live. You could see film of what was taking place during the Afghanistan invasions and Iraq and Iran. You could watch those invasions taking place as they were occurring. Now, they're far away. They're another part of the world, but it has an impact just seeing that type of violence on a screen where you used to be entertained. At that point, balance, I think, is the key, and support is the key. But these also become teaching moments. This year, I've done a first day of school poem. For a lot of years, we read a story by Gary Soto called 7th Grade. And because I teach 7th grade, it talks about this young boy, Victor Rodriguez, and Victor is in love with Teresa. But as a typical 7th grade boy would do, he messes up every time he tries to impress her. But she's okay with that because she kind of likes him and they know each other from catechism class. So it turns out okay at the end. And I would have the kids write a poem about their own first day of school. This year, we're kind of writing about the first day of school, but I told them, think about how it's different from last year and this year. And think about whatever model you're following. And what kinds of things are you able to do and not to do? And what do you look forward to doing again? And it's amazing the answers they come up with.
Yeah, that actually, and I'm glad you said that, because that was the next question I was going to ask you, is how are you handling this discussion in 7th grade? Because I teach almost all juniors, like high school juniors. I have one senior class this year, but I'm so they're all 17. And so the conversation, I think, goes differently. Like, I student taught and did a little subbing in middle school. So I have a little bit, like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. And I liked it. I didn't like it enough to keep doing it, but I did enjoy it. And they offered me a job and all that. But how does that conversation go with the kids? Like, are they comfortable having a conversation about the pandemic and about the changes in school? Are they as confused as their parents are? Because I know parents are freaking out about everything. What's your sense of the kids? Like, how has that gone? How are the poems going?
I think what you have to do up front is establish a climate where a kid feels secure. And you know this, if you feel secure in a classroom, you're willing to open up a little bit more. You're willing to take a risk. You're willing to say something. And I let them know up front that I'll be the most supportive person they can meet. However, if someone does something cruel, I'll try to get that person off to the side and say, hey, that's not what we do here. Please, that's not appropriate. But I also joke a little bit too. I'll tell them, if you hear me start to sound like a ninja, if you hear me in the background going, hi, then you better run, because I've turned into your worst nightmare because you're trying to hurt somebody. And it's my job to protect that person you're trying to hurt. So do not hurt anyone. It's wrong. You don't want to be hurt yourself. So don't go hurting someone else. It's just not appropriate.
You're right. Yeah. And I mean, establishing that comfort, I tell the kids, because a lot of my classes are AP language and composition. So it's basically like you're trying to duplicate a freshman writing and rhetoric course. And so right on the first day of school, I introduce the basics of rhetoric and we get into it. And then I have them do a little breakdown and analysis of the lesson I just taught. And so I'm like, who's the speaker? What are my biases? Who's my intended audience? Like I have them and I say, so what was the purpose? They say to teach us the basics of rhetoric. And I'm like, sure. But I'll be honest, I'm going to teach you this again in 2 weeks anyway, whether you learned it or not today. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And I said, I promise I'm going to do not the same lesson, but you're going to learn the same stuff again because not all of you are getting it this time. And they said, okay. I said, so what's the real purpose if I'm going to do it again anyway? And they all look at me blank. I say, I'm trying to get you to have confidence in me and in the class. If you believe I'm not going to waste your time, you believe this is a class that's useful to you, and you're comfortable talking to other people in the room, this all goes way better. And so my rule for, where you do the ninja, my classroom, kids make posters. They think it's hilarious. It's don't be a jerk. If anybody says something bad, you're mean to another kid, the kids do it to each other. You hear somebody in the back there go, hey, don't be a jerk. And you look over and somebody's going, oh, sorry. I don't deal with any of the behavior stuff because they have so much fun with it. But you have to create that comfort, and this is a weird year to do that, especially because we're all virtual. We're all online right now. And so it's really weird trying to create that dynamic. Is it different having the smaller classes? Like, because you guys are doing like a day 1, day 2, A day, B day kind of thing, right?
Right.
Does that change the dynamic since the class size is different? And I'm assuming you're doing some kind of distancing in the classroom. Like, is the physical change in the building affecting the conversation or the teaching?
I told the kids yesterday, I said, it is absolutely killing me that I can't walk up to somebody who has just said something wonderful and give you a little fist bump or give you a high five. I said, I have to give you an air high five.
Yeah.
That's the closest I can get. I said, when you're writing, I can't walk by and lean into your screen and say, oh, I like that. Ooh, watch that spelling over there. That looks interesting. Have you thought about taking it this way? That's gone because we have to maintain that distance.
Yeah.
And the toughest thing is I have kids eating lunch in my homeroom. Mm-hmm. And while they're eating lunch, every once in a while, I have to say, okay, social distance. Come on, social distance. And I tell them, I'm not going to be screaming at you saying, how dare you do this? What are you doing? Don't you know better? Because you're not even going to be listening to that. That gets tuned out. The person who screams the loudest is heard the least.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Yeah.
What I need to do is I need to tell you as a reminder, here's our procedure. We've got to follow it. And then you're going to go ahead and do that because you're a contributor too. This is your classroom as well as mine. It's not just mine and I let you in once in a while. No, we're in this together.
So, and that's great. And I think that's very much the sort of message I send at the beginning of the year is, and that's why I go on that whole, like, what's the purpose of the lesson? What's the purpose of the class? Because once they clearly understand, here's what we're going to try to do for the rest of the year. I tell them, like, now think of it like it's basically like it's one team. I mean, everybody's going to do their own work and do whatever, but we now have common goals. And as long as we have common goals, we should be able to work together. So even if you don't like someone, not a big deal. They're trying to get their stuff done. You're getting yours, and we don't have to have conflicts, and things tend to go well. But that's actually one of the things that I think I would be least comfortable with is going into the classroom and then not being able to walk, not being able to move around the room freely, and swap materials and hand off papers and things. I think that would be really tricky. But I think the general mindset of hey, we're in this together, we can do this, I think that still applies even online. It just, it looks different. So, I mean, it sounds like you and I have some similar thoughts on how to run a classroom. So now I'm curious about your own education. So when you were a student, what kind of student were you? And I mean, did you like school? Were you good at school? How did you end up becoming a teacher?
I liked school. I liked English class a lot. I went to St. Mary's School, which was a parochial school. And boy, did we learn our grammar. We knew grammar inside out. When I went to public high school, Boundbrook High School, it was interesting that I knew grammar as well as almost anybody in the room. because we made sure that we knew grammar.
Yeah.
And college is the place where I think I found my voice. I had a teacher, Professor Green, was the nicest gentleman. And I know that because as a graduate assistant at the college, he was the one who would take the secretaries to lunch maybe every 2 weeks, just because. And then he would take me along with him. And the girl I was dating at the time, he would take her along with him, just so he could show that there's more to education than just going to class, than just grading papers. But I still remember Mr. Green, on my first paper I wrote for him, sending it back to me. And then after class, I was asking him about his comments in the grade. And he said, "You must have had a lot of old school marm teachers teaching you how to write." And I said, "Yeah, we wrote by the rules." He said, "You're in college now. Forget that. I want you to find your voice. I want you to be your own writer and write your own particular style." And he says, I'm sure you'll do that. And I had the most admiration for him. As a graduate student, I was his helper in one of his classes. And I would go to the classes and we'd team teach once in a while, or I would help to pass papers out, anything, just so I could be around that. I had outstanding professors in college.
Where did you go to school?
I went to what was then Trenton State College. It's now the College of New Jersey.
Okay.
We have always been an outstanding Best Buy school, an outstanding school standards-wise. We're one of the top in the nation. And we graduate at a percentage that's one of the highest in the nation. The education department, the teaching part of it, was basically driven by Dr. Lana Diskin. She was Miss Diskin at the time, and she was getting her doctorate. But we were so lucky because she was studying for her doctorate with Stephen Dunning and Henry B. Maloney. Henry B. Maloney was the immediate past president of the National Council of Teachers of English. Stephen Dunning was the sitting president of the National Council of Teachers of English. And she brought in Stephen Dunning to talk to us. She brought in authors and researchers. And the one I'll never forget, she brought in Isaac Asimov.
Wow.
I was 10 feet away from Isaac Asimov. And honestly, to this day, I don't know what he said because he had these huge sideburns. And I was so overwhelmed by his sideburns that I just thought, oh my gosh, this is Isaac Asimov. It's a dream come true. I can't believe this.
He's so starstruck, you can barely pay attention. That's awesome. And I think that what you're saying there is obviously, something that we're hearing from you throughout this is a lot of enthusiasm. Like, you're very passionate about things you're talking about. But I think it's also important, especially in teacher education, like in preparing teachers, that the people in those roles need to be passionate about it and not just about the research. And that was something that I went to James Madison University in Virginia. Most of the professors were good, and they were very focused on the teaching. But we also had a handful that were sort of more in the research mode, and they were just teaching classes kind of because they had to. And that was such a difference. And I always felt like those were the classes that I got the least out of, not because they didn't have good information, but because they didn't sort of sell the information, And in the end, some of the most valuable stuff that I sort of gained were connections. I for a while was on the board for the state, the Virginia Association of Teachers of English. And so I got into that through my professors. But yeah, so, having those connections can be really important. From your college experience and meeting some of the people on the board, the past president of NCTE, is that how you got involved in NCTE and the NJCTE, the New Jersey sort of division? Did it start then, or did you get involved later?
It started pretty much when I left school, but actually when I started college, I was not sure what I wanted to do. As a kid, I always wanted to play for the Yankees. I was going to be Mickey Mantle's replacement in center field, but I don't have the athletic ability that would translate to putting me in center field on a championship team. And I remember through my first year, putting down teacher as my goal and saying, okay, I'll be an English ed major. I'm good in English. Maybe I can teach. And I was in a freshman math class waiting for the professor to arrive to start the class. It was about 10 minutes before. And I hear this conversation between these two guys who are sitting a couple desks from me. And the one guy saying, "Did you get this problem?" The other guy says, "No, it was pretty difficult for me." And the first guy says, "Yeah, I didn't get it either." Well, I had solved the problem and I knew what was needed to solve the problem. So I kind of leaned over and said, "Do you guys want some help with that?" And they looked at me and said, "Yeah." So I got up out of my desk, walked over and said, "Okay, here's what I did." And I explained the process to them. And they looked at me and said, "Oh, gee, thanks." And I sat back down again. And it sounds like it's silly or it's out of a movie, but I thought, okay, maybe I want to teach.
That was the moment, like it clicked, like yeah.
Pretty good.
It's funny how people land in this job. I mean, some people always wanted to do it. I was already most of the way through my teacher education classes before I decided I actually wanted to be a teacher. Like I was in the classroom and I had like a week-long practicum where, you weren't just observing, I was actually teaching. And that was when I was like, you know what, I think I actually want to do this. Up to that point, I was just taking the education classes because they do a 5th-year master's. So it was like the cheapest way I could find to get an extra year of college. Mm-hmm. And the education classes are mostly full of cute girls. So for most of it, I was just like, I want to be in the classes with all these girls, and most of them aren't that difficult. And, and then I ended up actually having, like, all right, teach for a week. And I was like, oh, I actually really like this, but up until that moment, I would, in the classes, they say, "So why do you want to be a teacher?" And I used to be like, honestly, I don't think I do. I'm just here. And then the actual act of teaching and having that interaction is sort of what does it. Like you said earlier about, when you see the light bulb go on and you see a kid sort of get it and internalize something that's important and valuable to them, that is what does it for me. Like, that's why I want to be a teacher. But you don't get that until you're a teacher. You can't read about that in a textbook and actually have it feel important to you in that way. Thinking about, how you sort of found yourself in education or, becoming a teacher, et cetera. And you now obviously have a lot of experience. Last year, I mentored a new teacher, and he was great. It's the second time in my career I've done it. And I've been very fortunate that the people I've mentored showed up and they were already in the top half of the department without any help. And so it makes me look good as a mentor. And I'm like, well, look how great they are, but I could have done nothing and they would have been fine. But I did find myself giving a lot of advice. And one of the things that I thought was cool is that I found myself giving advice that I myself didn't know. Like sometimes, you learn something by teaching it. And so I realized things about teaching that I was doing, but I had never actually put into words through that mentor process. I don't know if I'm sure at some point you've had that mentor role, but like what kind of guidance or advice do you have for younger teachers? Because you're reflecting on when you were getting passionate about education and you were young, you're now 46, 47 years later. What do you tell young teachers to try to help them either be good at it or at least, stick with it?
We started in NJCTE, a mentor program. And soon after we put this together, COVID-19 hit. So we haven't really had a chance to facilitate it. But I look back on my own teaching, and I think I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't have the solid foundation that my parents gave me and the support through the early years. Plus, I had an amazing mentor, Dr. Joseph Burns. I remember him when he went for his doctorate. It was partway through my teaching experience. I think I had been teaching for maybe 7-8 years or so. And Joe let me in on everything he was learning. When he would learn it, he would come and explain it to me. Well, I just read this book by Sir Giovanni, and he says about all these different types of people. And, we learned about Csikszentmihalyi, and he says all these different things, and Vygotsky, and he believes this and that. And so he included me in everything. And having that mentor who will be honest with you, who will be patient with you. I would mess up something and he would never say, "What's wrong with you, man? Come on, you got to be better than that." He would say, "No." And he kind of giggle. He'd go, "No, let's try this instead." And I never felt that I was being put down. I never felt that I was anything less than supported. And when you feel that way, as the students feel that way, everyone who feels that way can take a chance. You can find yourself. So I don't know that it's much different than what I've been able to translate to the kids. I'm here for you. If you need me, no problem. If you don't need me, that's not a problem either. But know that if something goes wrong, I'm not going to come wagging a finger at you. What I do with the kids is I tell them, "I don't know that you want me to grade this paper yet."
That's a nice way to put that. Yeah.
It's not going to be in your best interest. I don't know what happened. I don't know if it's a mistake, if you forgot, if you neglected it. That's not going to matter to me. What matters to me is that you learn this skill and that you learn responsibility. So I'll tell you what, how about if you try this again and let's go ahead with that. And I think the best application I've seen of that happened actually when I was teaching freshman comp at Union County College. I had a student, they used to take students if they went through the remedial classes before they took the actual English 101, and they had to get certain grades and pass a certain standard on a writing test. Well, she came into my room on our very first paper. I handed her back her paper, and it had between 70 and 80 mistakes on a 2-page, 500-word paper. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a draft, so it's not graded yet. It's just checked in that you did it. And I called her to the side after class, and I said, I've got to ask you something. Are you comfortable here? She says, yeah. Did you have trouble writing this paper? Yeah. Well, do you think maybe this class is a little too advanced for you? Oh, you don't understand. I said, well, it's okay. I'm not going to be offended if you find that this is a little bit too much for you and you still need to maybe go back to the 099 class or 098 class and maybe go through that one more time. No, you don't understand. Well, okay, explain it to me then, please. She said, you're my last hope. No pressure.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so what do you mean I'm your last hope? She says, well, I went to this other college, I won't mention the name, and she said, I failed freshman English 3 times there. Okay. I came here and I failed freshman English again. You're my last hope. I've got to pass. If I don't pass this time, I'm out. And I thought, all right, I need something creative here. So I looked at her and I said, I'll tell you what. Are you willing to work hard? Yes. Are you willing to work very hard? Oh, yes. Are you willing to go back and keep on revising your paper until it gets to the point where it's acceptable? Sure. If I hand it back to you 2 times. Yep. 3. Yep. 4. Yep. You sure? Uh-huh. Okay. Here's the deal. I'll keep handing you your papers back until you can convert them into grades of A. Oh, okay. I like that. Doesn't matter how many times? No. Now, you know we have other papers that go on too, so you may be getting more than 1 back at a time. It's okay. I said, here's the other part of the deal. If you earn an A by redoing these however many times you need to, you will have received an A. You will have earned it. If you don't, well, then I can't help you. Deal? She said, yeah, deal. Okay. I gave her the paper back. Next time it came to me, it had, I think, between 40 and 50 mistakes. Okay. And I just kept sending it back. And there were fewer and fewer mistakes. And each paper, there were fewer mistakes. We did 5 papers during the year. The last paper came in with 4 mistakes. All the others were fixed, every one of them. So at the end of the year, I would call them up one at a time and let them know their grades. And I called her up and we would go outside in the hall. And I said, you did everything I asked you to do. Yeah. and you converted all of your papers into A papers. Well, that's the grade you're receiving. You're receiving an A. And she almost was in tears. And I said, you were willing to work hard, so you got the reward. Thank you. I said, honey, you can thank me, but a lot of it is your effort too. So don't take the focus off of what you did, because you've become a good writer now as a result of that. Well, she went on to English 102, got a B, took a 200 class, got an A. When she graduated, she transferred to Kean University. She received her undergraduate degree, went on, received her master's degree. She's now enrolled in a doctoral program.
Wow.
And she would come by when I was teaching my Saturday morning class. And as she would walk by, she'd have her two little girls in tow, and she would stop. She'd always wave to me, but every once in a while she would stop, stick her head in, and she would say, he's the best. He's the best professor. You're so lucky. And I would take out my wallet and say, was that 10?
Yeah. Well, and that's actually that back and forth process is really important. And it's one of the things that I think we just sort of think, speaking collectively as maybe English teachers overall, and me in particular teaching an AP class, we don't do enough drafting. Like the AP exams, you got 40 minutes, write this thing, let's go. And it's not that it's bad to be able to write a good first draft. I'm not opposed to the timed essay. The problem is for some kids to get good at the timed essay, it takes so many tries at that it doesn't leave a lot of time for the other revisions that you might want to be doing. Because in a real life situation, if you're writing something like that, you probably have the time to write it and read it. And, even if you don't have time for 5 back and forth, you probably have time for 1 or 2, and it's hard to pull that off. If the student's willing to work hard and the teacher's willing to match it, then I always say, the question is not, will the student be successful? The question is how long until the student is going to be successful. And so if everybody has both the motivation and the patience for it, you can always do that. But it's difficult, and it's especially difficult in English, where so much of our work is skills based, and where that grading and feedback piece can take so much time. I used to joke, I have a cousin who's a very good PE teacher in Maryland, and I used to tease him, he's the dummy in the gym or whatever. And he'd be like, I'm not a gym teacher, it's physical education. We go back and forth. After about 3 or 4 years teaching, I came to the conclusion he's way smarter than me, right? Because he doesn't have to grade all these essays. Like, what's your lesson plan? He's like, kickball. I'm like, you get the same pay. So you're clearly smarter than me, right? I'm working too hard. But that's always my feeling on it, is that revision, that feedback is the most important part in improving writing. And it's also one of the things that's hardest to do well as an English teacher, because you have so many kids and it takes so much time. I'm a night owl. I do most of that grading after my family goes to bed. So from like 11 to 2 in the morning, I'll be grading essays when I need to. And it's the only way I can get it done, but it's not the best way necessarily to do it. But I think it's important, so I ink them up, hand them back, make sure everybody knows what they can do, offer revisions when possible. But that's a process. And, you got to think, if you're going through that kind of process, I mean, maybe that's an extreme one, but if you're having that back and forth with students, you're giving good feedback, and then you do it over the course of a career, like, gosh, you need to get some of the kids in a math class, you need a project topic, and have them calculate the number of minutes you've spent grading, essays, giving feedback on essays throughout your career. That would be a fun number to have. But if you don't do it, it's hard to say you're a good English teacher if you're not doing the things you're talking about. But it's time intensive. So in thinking about this, you have experience teaching, obviously middle school, and now we talked about through at the university level. If you could create your own school, like if you were put in charge of, think charter school, private school, whatever, you have a budget, a building, whatever, what would you do to create the school that you would feel best about? Like, what do you think school should look like, even if it's very different than what we have now?
I'm going to dovetail this with the question that you asked prior about advice to the pre-service teachers and the student teachers, as well as the neophyte teachers. I think that whatever you do should reflect a learning environment that is not bound within one subject area. I don't think it should be bound within one room. I think there should be a lot of interaction, a lot of cross-curricular and cross-disciplinary opportunities. That's real life. The kid in high school who fails every math class he or she takes, but can rip an engine out of a car, rebuild it to the most precise specifications, put it back in, is using algebra, geometry, trigonometry, things that we don't necessarily have in textbook-driven curricula. We tend to rely on standardized tests, which for me would be only for guidance purposes, for diagnostic. Okay, what do you know? So I at least have some idea, and I don't need a standardized test to do that. I can do that from a piece of writing.
Yeah.
I can do that from a math teacher surveying you with a teacher-made test. I went to a meeting at the Department of Education. They were going to satellite areas all throughout the state and asking us about standardized testing. And I had been as polite as I could be for as long as I could be. And finally I said, no, I've got to stand up and say something. So all I heard was that we were doing poorly as a nation and poorly as a state. And what could we possibly do to improve our students' test scores? And I stood up and said, I believe that we are creating a problem that really isn't a problem. So looking for a solution to something that isn't a problem might be a waste of our time. And the place became completely silent. I said, there's a saying by this little known historical figure. I think his name was Aristotle. And he said, what he said actually is something different than what is actually attributed to him. What the general saying is those that can do, those that cannot teach, which is not what Aristotle said.
And those who can't teach go into admin, right?
I heard that part too. What he really said is those that can do, those that understand, teach. And there's so much to understand in the process. And I said, we're citing statistics. Oh, we're 22nd, we're 25th in the world and this and that. I said, no, we need to look at what Mark Twain said. And I cleaned it up a little bit. I said, Mark Twain will tell you that there are lies, there are blatant lies, and then there are statistics. And we're using statistics that are not comparing apples to apples or even apples to oranges. We're comparing apples to pipe fittings. And so we're doing the wrong thing. When you look at the statistics, you're looking at statistics from all over the world where they're telling you, hey, wait a minute. We're not comparing to this country and that country. Okay, but let's use the same statistical base. If we remove all of the special needs students, not because they're not worthy, but they're not tested in the other countries. So let's take them out of the formula. They're going to need special accommodations and they may not be able to score as high in many cases. Oh, and then there's the poverty level. Well, let's remove poor students as well because those students tend not to have the higher scores. And I asked an open-ended question. I said, do you know where we rank if you remove those two factors and even the playing field, so we're working with the same set of statistics? We rank number 1 in the world. And if you wonder about that, why do people send their kids here to go to college, to go to high school, to go to other schools? I've yet to hear someone come over to America and say, no, I don't want to go to those schools. They're only ranked so-and-so in the world.
Yeah, I teach a lot of immigrant students who are, actually most, not all, but most of the students who I teach were born here, but their parents have moved from East or Southeast Asia. And yeah, it always strikes me as funny the way people play that. And I've actually had that conversation several times that the numbers are misleading. And that's where a few episodes ago on the podcast, I talked to Jeremy Wayne Tate, who's the CEO of the CLT exam. They're trying to compete with the SAT and ACT. And he's a hoot to follow on Twitter. Like, he's a very conservative guy, but he puts stuff out. Like, they're always great talking points. Like, I love people that just have good ideas, even if I don't agree with their ideas, and he's a guy that I can engage with like that, even though I disagree with at least sometimes a lot of what he says. But he always throws out since the Department of Education was founded in the 1970s, he's like, education's gone down the drain. Our test scores are down. Our literacy's down. I'm like, yeah, but like the most important thing that they've done in public education, like not including higher ed, is basically found ways to get everybody into the classroom. Like, your test scores before and after aren't fair comparisons, and so that's really it, is that if the goal is to educate everyone, then we're doing a better job of that, and the fact that the test score looks different because you included everyone in it, well, then maybe it's a better indication, that maybe the numbers before were flawed because we weren't actually including everyone. School wasn't really doing its job. And I think it's reassuring, if you really look at the numbers, and that is generally true. I mean, I personally, I wouldn't toss all the tests. Kids are over-tested significantly. I don't think some standardized testing is a bad thing, just because it is good to see how are the kids doing, how are the teachers doing. It's not bad to have more information, but it's bad when the kids are stressed out about it, or when we forfeit 2 and 3 weeks of instructional time for all the testing. Every time, in my 11th grade classes, those AP kids, they have their AP exam. 11th grade in the state of Virginia is the only time they take their standardized tests in English in all of high school. It's a 2-day writing test and then another reading test. So I'm at 3 days for state testing, AP, and then the county level, they want to start instituting new benchmark tests. I was like, guys, we're going to be at 11 lost instructional days. And especially this year where we're on distance learning, so everything's going a little slower. I was like, you realize how much we're forfeiting? Like, I can tell you what the tests are going to say. The tests are going to tell you that those kids could have used 11 extra days of instructional time. Like, what's the goal here? And so, yeah, I think you're right. Sometimes we take our eye off the ball a little bit because we get so hyper-focused on those numbers. Not that we shouldn't consider them, but when that becomes the only thing that we talk about in these meetings, then that's probably a bad meeting. How do you think about teacher accountability if you were willing to remove more of those tests and trust the teacher to do their own assessments of the students? In your experience throughout your career, how do you feel about the different forms of teacher accountability we've seen? There have been times where things have been very hands-off. There's times where, right now in Virginia, things are pretty regimented, and we've got like 7 standards and you have to upload evidence of all of it and all that. If you were running your ideal school, how do you check in on the teachers?
I would observe teachers in action. I wouldn't do it as a snapshot, but I would do something that would be a narrative throughout a year. And I had mentioned this at one point to a colleague, that I think a drop-in is a snapshot. And you can drop in at on somebody's worst day or on somebody's best day. It doesn't necessarily translate to what you've done throughout the year. But show me where you've taken the kids from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. What are the things that they've been able to accomplish? What have they been able to do that maybe they weren't able to do when they first came in? What experiences have you provided for them? What outside resources have you used to make this a better experience for them? Have you linked the community resources to what you do? We had an amazing project that happened right after 9/11 occurred. And it was student driven, and it didn't follow anything that was in the curriculum. After 9/11, we talked about heroes. And I said to my students, okay, let's define what a hero is. And we listed all the traits of a hero. We had read a story called Zebra by Chaim Potok. And this young man, Adam Martin Zebrin, is called Zebra because he likes to run. And he would run through the neighborhood, and the people on the lawns or on their chairs, on their porches would holler, "Go, Zebra, go," as he ran by. Well, he gets to the bottom of a hill and he can't stop, and he's hit by a car. And it hurts his hand, and he gets some other injuries, and he's just not the same kid that he used to be. Well, short of it is that he ends up befriending an art teacher who does a summer course, and he takes the summer course. The art teacher has one arm, and he teaches the kids how to do junk art, where you take junk from the garbage and you create art out of it. And it kind of changes Zebra's whole perspective, because he gets a letter from this gentleman who lets him know that this art teacher was in Vietnam, and that's how he had lost his arm in a helicopter crash. And his best friend was killed in that crash. His best friend now is listed on the War Memorial down in DC. So every year he takes the work from one kid who has been inspirational and puts it in front of his friend's name and leaves it there for the day. And he has a picture of it, and there's Zebra's work in front of the War Memorial. So I said, we need a memorial because we lost Mr. Froner from our community. He was a Port Authority patrolman, and he saved a lot of lives before he gave up his own life. Well, 7 kids, the principal, the vice principal, the guidance counselor, when those 3 could make it, the widow of Mr. Froner, all came to meetings. We met starting in January on Thursday for lunch. And every Thursday we met right through June. The kids designed a garden. They created the plans. One of the young ladies took the plans to a landscaper who donated his men's time, his own time, and created this beautiful garden along with the kids. We helped to put it together. We had gone to the council meeting and got all the approvals, and we planned a big ceremony. We had over 200 people attend the ceremony. We had speakers. We had the bagpiper marching band come in and start the whole proceeding on a kind of drizzly day, and that had no dry eye in the place. We had guest speakers. We did it up nicely. But when we were getting our plan together the last week, I said, we need a poem here. There's got to be a poem, because this is a dedication ceremony, and a poem would just fit so nicely. Would anyone like to write a poem? And no one volunteered. I found a student I had the year before. I called him Poetry Man. He was a kid who would irritate a lot of people because he would sit in his chair and parts of his body would be in various parts of the room while he was sitting in his chair. I mean, he was just everywhere. Sometimes he was under the chair. And he would blurt out every once in a while, but he was a brilliant poet. And the kid had some talent. So rather than scolding him all the time, I would call him Poetry Man. I would try to include him in a lesson. Well, I found him in the hallway, and I said, "Hey, Poetry Man, can you help me out? Come here." He goes, "What? Can you do a favor for me?" "I don't know." "Well, do you think you could write a poem?" "I don't know." "I know you're really good at poetry. We're doing this event for Mr. Froner to kind of pay tribute to him, and I thought you'd be perfect for this. Would you be willing to write a poem for me?" He said, "I don't know." "All right, I'll tell you what. Think about it. And I know you can do a great job with it, so give it a shot if you would." And he leaves. Now, that was a Friday afternoon. We're set to go the Saturday after that following day. So we've got like 8 days. Monday comes by. I see him every once in a while in the hallway, doesn't say a word. Tuesday comes by, goes by me a couple of times, doesn't say a word. Wednesday, I'm starting to get a little nervous now. He comes by and I said, "Poetry Man." And he puts his hands up to the side of his head and goes, "Oh my gosh," runs down the hall as fast as he can, opens up his locker. Everything flies out of his locker, grabs his binder, comes running up to me, opens his binder. Of course, everything flies out of his binder. And he goes through the papers and he says, "Here." And he wrote a poem for Mr. Froner. And it was not maybe the greatest literature in the world, but it was a poem that was appropriate for the time. And basically, it said that Mr. Froner hasn't left us. He just went with the angels and they gave him a pair of wings. And I've got tears in my eyes at this point. I thought, this is beautiful. Would you read it at the ceremony? I don't know. Well, come to the ceremony and we'll work it out from there. So I showed it to other people on the staff, and they all had tears in their eyes and said, okay, it's not just me. This is a good poem. So we put him into the program, told him, when to report. And about 3/4 of the way through the program, the poem was going to come up. So I introduced him, and I had said to him beforehand, look, if you can't read it, I'll read it for you, but I don't want that option. If you get nervous, I'll stand next to you. You can just hand it to me if you have to stop. If you're okay with it, it's fine. I'll sit down. I introduced him. I looked at him. He went right by me like I didn't exist. Went up to the microphone and started reading. So I sat down. Over 200 people are in tears. He finishes the poem. He sits back down. And now I have to go up to the mic, and we have a couple more parts of the program to finish. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I have to say something. I can't tell a joke. This is not a time to try to tell a joke.
How do you follow that?
Right. So what I did is I made it kind of self-effacing. I said, let's take a moment while I gather my things together here and get reorganized so we can continue. And I just waited. And after about a minute or two, I said, okay, let's continue on now with the program. Thank you all for your patience. And we went on. But that meant more to that young man than anything. And that's that idea of making a connection. And back to the student teachers, when you want to make a connection with your students, don't be the salesman who's trying to sell English or trying to sell math or trying to sell social studies, almost like a top 40 guy. Try to be more, hey, I see you're wearing that logo. Are you a fan? What's your favorite sport? Engage them in something that's outside the subject area. Be a person.
That's actually, it sounds so simple, but that's actually really important. I think in my experience, like thinking back to when I was a student, that's a lot of, I want to say a lot of my worst teachers, and I didn't have many bad teachers, but I think that was probably it. They were always trying too hard to seem a certain way. And it's like, if you can't be yourself and do this job, then you probably shouldn't do this job, because, that it's hard, and kids can smell a phony, and so being yourself and being that person is important. That's, it's kind of a cliche line, right? But it's you don't teach the content, you teach students. Like, oh, what do you teach? I teach students. But, it's cliche because people said it so much, because it's so true. And you got to keep that in mind. Now, do you think for the project like that, I used to sponsor a UNICEF club, and the students did I'm here to oversee you. I provide signatures, and once in a while I'll give you input when your ideas are, you need a little bit of help, but they did pretty much everything. And I still think that 2 or 3 of the kids who really ran the club, and we'd put on these big, essentially it was like a potluck, but these benefit dinners to raise money for when there was the earthquake in Haiti, when there was typhoon in, I think it was in the Philippines. Kids raised $5,000 and stuff just on their own by doing these potluck dinners, and they'd book all the guests and people would play music. And I really think that those kids learned more putting together those programs than they did in most of their other classes combined. I think back to my experience in high school, I probably learned as much or more doing the musical production team. We just did the business. We did tickets and sales for the ads and stuff. I probably learned more practical and useful things just doing that than I did in a lot of the classes. I always think how can I recreate that in the classroom? And you can't. That's kind of that's a limitation of the classroom. So maybe we need to find more ways to create those opportunities, or free up a little bit of the school day so that kids have a chance to do that sort of thing. Maybe our students are not only overscheduled outside of school, but I think sometimes they're overscheduled in school too. And it makes it hard to create some of the opportunities for the things like you were just talking about for the September 11th memorial. I have one other question that, is I think I told you books or movies that you'd want to recommend. But before we do that, you've recently won a series of awards. You've gotten a lot of recognitions. And I mentioned that as we first got rolling. What was your response when you found out that you were going to be named the National Educator of the Year by the AMLE? What was your response? Did you know that you were nominated? Or I'm just saying, because it's always nice to get that. I've won a couple local awards, and it feels good. We don't get bonuses. I don't get a big paycheck, but it's nice when people notice once in a while that you're trying hard. What was your response? What was it like finding out that you had won a major award like that?
I was overwhelmed. There was a message left on my phone to call AMLE, and it ended up it's the lady who's the CEO of AMLE. And I called back the next day. I thought that they wanted me to evaluate some more of the workshop proposals because I've done that for them for a couple of years, people who want to present at the conference. And you rank them, you tell, should it stand on its own? Should it be included as part of a cluster group? And I figured, yeah, that was it. And the lady, when she spoke to me, said, "Oh, I have some good news for you, Joe. This is Stephanie Auditor." And I said, "Okay, what's the good news?" She said, "You've been named our 2020 AMLE National Educator of the Year." And I said, "Oh my gosh, that's incredible. It's hard to get me at a loss for words, but I think you've just accomplished that."
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. I just, oh my gosh. And when I received the award, in the statement they asked us to make for the press release, I said that I'm honored to be the person who receives this award, but I'm accepting the award on behalf of all of the middle level educators who are inspiring kids in their own schools, in their own classrooms. That to me is the key. I'm not the greatest thing ever to be invented. I hope I'm not the worst. But what I do isn't all that different from what a lot of other people are doing right now, and maybe even doing better than I. They're making a difference in the lives of kids. And that's the essence. If somebody is there for you early in your life and they can help you to turn on that light bulb, they can help you to activate the spotlight, if they can pique your curiosity, if they can give you an itch that you have to work hard to scratch, well, they've accomplished something. They've actually instilled in you that love of learning, which is pretty much a lifelong skill. That's the skill you're going to go away with that can never be tested. That's the skill that you're going to use every single day of your life. It's interesting that people who create the tests had the business community behind them begging for tests because kids couldn't write and they couldn't do this and they couldn't do that. And now they're finding that with all that concentration on tests, well, that's not really making a difference out there. What the business community is looking for now is what my colleague Ken Pasek and I call power skills. Some people call them soft skills. We like to think of them as power skills. Can you show up on time? Do you see a project through to its conclusion? Can you work well with people? Can you facilitate on your own? Can you make an executive decision? Will you have behaviors when you represent a company or a corporation or an organization that will not be embarrassing to them? Do you make good judgments? And all those things are not on tests, but that's what's important. What's tested is just a small amount of foundational skills. In fact, a lot of businesses right now are telling you, don't worry about getting an MBA. We can teach you all that stuff. Can you do these other power skills so our company is represented and we're sure when we send you out that we're not going to have to do a lot of putting out of brush fires? We don't want to have to do that. We want you to represent the company in the most proud way possible.
That's, and I think that's great. I have a coworker who's, like soft skills, or I like power skills. I think that's a nice way to put it. Like that's her thing, and I always sort of chime in because several years ago, I was probably 4 or 5 years ago, through George Washington University, they did a program called Teachers in Industry, where it was like a summer externship. So for, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. And so I got to spend a few days or a week at different local businesses, local government offices, and they would say, here's what we do, here's what we need students to do, et cetera. And over again, they basically said, you need to be a competent reader and writer, maybe some basic math. And so, but anyway, it was like the 3 R's. They're like, we need read and write and arithmetic, and it doesn't always have to be that fancy. And then everybody hammered on the idea of soft skills or power skills, the interpersonal relationships and all that. And I think that sometimes what has happened is that, we got so focused on the testing that it eliminated some of the other activities that build those skills or that give students those opportunities. Now there's a push. I mean, it's not necessarily a new thing, but there's a push towards mastery grading, which my county is adopting. I don't think it's a bad thing. The grade should reflect, have you mastered the skills? The problem is it takes out any grade related feedback on, the student's behavior. They can turn in an essay whenever, as long as it's in by the end of the quarter. You don't take points off for late work. I'm fine. I've never been big on, penalizing late work anyway, within reason, but there's no other place to give the feedback, right? And so my colleague is arguing for it. And at first I thought it was kind of silly, but I'm starting to support her idea that they should essentially have 2 columns on their report card. And one is that mastery of content, and that there should be a soft skill category so that parents understand, because what good is it if you get an A in the class, but you're a jerk to everyone and you turned in everything late? Nobody wants to hire you. It doesn't matter what your GPA was. You're bad to work with. And so she's making the argument that we need to modify a report card essentially to reflect the power skills, because she's like, that's at least as important as everything else we're doing, probably more. And somehow we're minimizing it in everything we're doing. We're acting like the only thing they need to be able to do is meet these set, curricular standards. And if all the rest of it is just, well, now we're not recording it, we're not paying any attention. She goes, what's going to happen in 10 years when all these kids hit the workforce? And I'm like, it's a valuable point, and I don't know if it has to be on the report card, but there should be some instrument to reinforce the value of those skills and to provide feedback on it. Because as you said, that's probably going to play out, more intensely for most students than, can you identify all the adverbs in this sentence? I mean, that's good to do, but it's probably better to be able to, run a meeting or something like that. Yeah, it's tricky. It's a tricky thing, but if people are, treating the students well and setting the right climate, as you had mentioned earlier, then you have an environment in which those things are possible, and so even in distance learning or hybrid models, hopefully we're not seeing too many of those things go by the wayside. All right, so let's do books and movies, and then you get a little open mic at the end in case there's anything we missed that you want to promote or talk specifically about, because you've got a lot. But if you were going to recommend a couple of books or movies to people, just either personal enjoyment, could be educationally related, anything at all, what do you think some of our listeners should read or watch?
I don't watch a ton load of movies, but one of my all-time favorites is The Pride of the Yankees, not only because I'm a baseball fan and wanted to play for the Yankees one day, but I love the message where the courage of Lou Gehrig comes through. He's dying. He has ALS disease. He has no real hope for surviving. Yet he stands up at a microphone in front of a filled stadium being broadcast all over the United States, saying that today he feels that he's the luckiest man in the world. He doesn't focus on his problems, but he focuses on the things that he has been able to accomplish, the person that he's been able to become, knowing that there are people out there who probably have worse, yet he's not in a self-pity mode. He's more celebrating life and the life that he has for as long as he's going to have it. And that message is so powerful to me because we have no idea of where this is going to go. There are 2 very short videos that I've used in my classroom, I've used at PD workshops. And the first one is by a group, purplefeather.co.uk, and it's called The Power of Words. And folks may have seen this already. It's about a blind man sitting at the foot of steps in the middle of a plaza. People go by once in a while, they toss a coin. And the sign next to him says, "I'm blind, please help me." A very well-dressed young lady comes by. She walks past him, stops, turns around, goes back, takes the sign from under his arm, and puts on the other side a different message entirely. She rewrites the message, puts it back under his arm, and she leaves. Now people are going by and they're dropping handfuls of coins. And he had heard her footsteps the first time and he felt her shoes. She comes back again. He hears the same footsteps, feels the same shoes. And he says, because they're from Scotland, he says, "Love, what did you do to my sign?" And she says, "I wrote the same thing, only in different words." He says, "Thanks, love." And the camera pans out, and you now see the new message on the sign. It no longer says, "I'm blind, please help me." It says, "It's a beautiful day, and I can't see it." And the video ends with the slogan of Purple Feather, who used to be content providers, online content providers. And it says, "Change your words, change your world."
Nice.
That is so powerful. And I tell my students, look, that's poetry, because in a few words, they've impacted extremely gratefully and extremely powerfully a message that you all can benefit from. The other short video is a video that's, I don't know the actual name of it, but if you look it up under veggie soup, it was from Pan Asia, and a young boy is coming by a restaurant, and a lady comes chasing after him, hollering at him because he stole some medicine. And the owner of the restaurant comes out and asks what's going on. And the lady says, "He stole this." And so the gentleman says, is your son sick? I'm sorry, is your mom sick? And he says, "Yeah." So the gentleman takes money and pays the lady and tells his daughter to get some veggie soup, which he then sends home with the young boy, along with the medication now paid for. Later on in the video, a beggar comes by, and the man reaches out to the beggar and gives him something to eat. And then suddenly he just collapses. He goes into the hospital, and the daughter's there. Now she's grown because she's the one who brought out the veggie soup. And the father has an operation, and the bill is tremendous, and she can't afford to pay it. So they're going to have to sell the restaurant. And there's a picture of a doctor who is sitting looking at the x-rays, and it comes back to the young lady who had her head down on the bed, just worrying about how she's ever going to pay her dad's bill. And she picks up her head, and there's an envelope, and she opens up the envelope, and on the inside of the envelope, there's a sheet, and the sheet has all the procedures against the same bill, but it says 0. And it says, "For kindness," something to the effect, "for kindness shown years ago." That young boy was the young boy who became the doctor who now saved the dad's life. And the power of that, to me, is just incredible. It is absolutely incredible.
I haven't seen that one. The one you're talking about for Purple Feather, I think I've seen it, or I've seen one like it. I'll have to look that up, because that could work. And I like how you sort of paired it with the Pride of the Yankees. I actually use Lou Gehrig's speech in my class most years. It's short. It's such a great speech. There's so much you can do with it. But to be able to sort of put a few of those different materials together like that, I think can work wonders. You know, and as you said, it's sort of the power of words in every one of those, I think, could be important. That's fantastic. What's your favorite book?
I'm a little biased. One of my students wrote a book, and I was her editor for the book. I brought in Stephen Kozan, who comes in with Tony Malfair, who's an artist. And Stephen creates his own books. He said that he reached out to the 17 or 18 big box companies who all refused him. So he writes his own stories now. He's a digital printer. So he prints his books, and then he sells them. Well, he wanted to do something for kids. And he said, there's so much good writing out there. And he and I had talked about different ways to address that. And he came up with publishing books that kids would write. He goes out and has the kids do flash fiction. And as part of the flash fiction process, he now selects a student to expand that. Maybe he'll take 5 students, have them expand, give their overview to the teacher who sends it to him, and then he chooses one to get expanded even more and actually publish. Well, I had a student who won awards 2 years in a row from Scholastic for their writing contest. She actually had her poem read at the second year's contest that she entered. And I was fortunate enough to be able to introduce her at the ceremony, and I was prouder than I could ever be. So she wrote a dystopia called Project Morai, and it's a fascinating book about the future and a very controlling government who tells you when you are going to die. And if you don't die at that point, then they'll come and just kill you off. Well, her main character doesn't die when she's supposed to. So she has to hide now because they'll come and kill her. And she needs to make a decision to go off and meet with the rebel who is going to change all this. When she was writing the novel, we got to the point meeting once a week by phone. And then I would spend about 10 hours editing during the week. She would spend gosh knows how many hours just writing. It got near the time when she would be going to her native land to visit family. And then she was going to 8th grade, which is a difficult grade, difficult transition. So her mom said, I don't want you having to write through 8th grade. It's too difficult. And I had told her, and I told all the kids the story of The Outsiders with S.E. Hinton, how S.E. Hinton basically said at an NCTE conference that it wasn't a disagreement with the teacher in high school that caused her to fail English in high school. She failed because she spent more time on her book. That's the only thing that mattered to her. She could have cared less about what they were doing in class. She was writing her book.
Yeah.
And so I tell my kids, don't take that approach. That's one out of who knows how many who've tried that and didn't make it. But Anna Clara wrote her book, and the book that she wrote is available through Stephen Kozan's website, Ready, Aim, Right. What she did is admirable. She ended it right at the point where the young lady in the story is ready to meet the rebel leader. And I told her, okay, you've got at least 2 more books in here, if not 3. You have the meeting with the rebel and the preparation for the uprising. Maybe you go through the uprising, maybe you don't. Next book, you have the uprising and the aftermath of the uprising. And if you want a 4th book, you have the prequel.
Yeah, she set herself up for a series. That's smart. That's like,
yeah.
You can serialize this. That's I feel like, that's I guess how a lot of books and movies go now, right? Like Hunger Games did basically that, and it's good. And I think a lot of my students, especially when I used to teach younger students, I feel like a lot of them liked reading books that were set up like that, where each book is one piece in that broader series. And so I think it's both a thing that is popular and maybe savvy business decision if you're trying to sell some books. That's good. All right, so I'll make sure I link to that on the website too.
Okay, if I may jump in also, another kid did a book, and Stephen had seen just the preparation for the book, just the flash fiction. And he said to me, Joe, I'm still going to grab one of your students, but this other teacher's student has a really good book, so I'm going to actually publish 2 this time. And he took this young man, Omar, and said that he would publish his book as well. Now, Omar had written the book originally in Spanish. I'm sorry, he wrote it in English, but the ESL teacher came to us during one of my breaks and said to Stephen, you have no idea what you have here. And Stephen said, what do you mean? He says, man, you got a gold mine here. This is something every teacher who's doing ESL at the middle level needs. He said, all right, talk to me. She said, when we go out to get materials for ESL kids at the middle level, there's nothing there. Things are either C-Spot Run type books, or they're way too advanced for the kids. This is written by a kid at their age, and it's something that they can relate to. She said, we're going to translate this book. The Spanish teacher and I are going to make sure we do this. Well, she ended up going to another school in another state because her husband became ill, and that's where his treatment was. but they still stayed in touch with Omar. They translated his book into Spanish, and now his book in Spanish is available as well, both on the Ready, Aim, Right website. He's Omar, she's Anna Clara. And I was very fortunate to co-author a chapter in a book that NCTE put out. It was released this July 2020, called Writing Can Change Everything. And it's a principles and practice book edited by Shelby Whitty. I wrote about a project that I have, and I teach my students how to write a comfort note, because a couple of years ago, I was standing in back of the church after collection was taken, and I'm putting the money in the bag because I'm an usher and a lector at church. And I look over, and the last two people who are going to exit the church are this young lady who was going to Catholic University at the time and her boyfriend. And she wanted to introduce her boyfriend to the pastor. And as she walked up, she just collapsed on the floor. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have such a helpless feeling. I have no medical background. I don't know what to do. I don't want to make this condition any worse, but I've got to do something. So I ran up behind the altar, got some wet paper towels, got some dry paper towels, ran back, gave these to the mom and said, maybe you can just pat your daughter's head once in a while with the cool towels, and then kind of wipe off her brow with the dry towels, maybe just to keep her comfortable until the emergency folks can get here. They took the young lady to the hospital, and I learned later on, actually the next day from an email, she had passed. And when I saw the dad at the wake, he said that she was gone as soon as she hit the ground, that she had AFib and she wasn't on medication, and she just died immediately. And so I'm thinking, how do you comfort somebody for something like that? So what I did is I drew a little bit from my experience negotiating and a little bit from my experience of teaching in the business department and watching salesmen function and teaching my students about advertising. And I said, okay, I got to come up with an approach where you can write a sensible comfort note that you're not going to be imposing on anyone. And it's going to be something that people can actually use. So the first part is make a connection with the person, as you do as a teacher, as you do as a friend, as we did before we started this interview. You connect, you find out that there's a feeling between the two of you. So I said, say something nice. Maybe, I was nice getting together with you last week. Or, gee, I saw that you answered a question in social studies class and the teacher reacted in such a nice way. Whatever it is, once you've made that connection, now you're going to have to address the problem. But you have to walk lightly, tread lightly when you approach this problem. Do not say, oh, I hear that you thought you were going to die. Well, that's not going to help the young man at all. You're bringing back bad memories. But say something to the effect, understand that there might have been a problem. I heard that there may have been a little confusion for you. Gee, it's been brought to my attention that there was a little bit of a mishap between. Then go ahead and suggest a possible solution. But keep yourself out of this. Don't say, you should have. You know what I would have done? Oh, I had the same thing happen to me and it was much worse. I know exactly how you feel. No, you don't. You're not who I am. And don't tell me what to do, please. It was tough enough. So go ahead and tell the person instead, in the future, you may want to consider, have you thought about, it might help you next time if, make it more conditional and keep yourself out of it. The fourth step should be, you know what, if you need help in the future, you can always come to me. I'd be more than happy to help you out. But that's not enough, because now you are the great problem solver, and the person receiving this advice is the one who causes the problems. So I thought of quid pro quo. And I've had people tell me, oh, no, that has a negative sense. No, it doesn't. It means this for that. It's an even exchange. So my fifth step is reach out and try to make an equal partner. Say, if I have help in the future, may I come to you for help? If I have a problem, can you help me out? Is there something I can do that you can help me to solve? And now you've pretty much leveled the playing field. You have two problem solvers. You can help me. I can help you. Gee, we're both helping each other. How nice is that? And then wish them a good day and say sincerely. That to me is one of those life skills. That's one of those skills that, yes, we're doing language arts. Yes, we're writing a note. Yes, we're using proper grammar, but we're also learning how to influence someone to make a difference in their life. And that story I wrote about in the article that I co-wrote for Writing Can Change Everything. My co-author, Lauren Zucker, teaches high school, and I was supposed to send my work to her so her students could look at it and give us good feedback. But it never came about because right about the time I was supposed to do that, my mom was at the end of a very severe illness that she'd been fighting for a lot of years, and she passed. She came home, went into hospice, and didn't make 4 days. And I was pretty much her care for most of the time. You know, I would teach, do meetings and whatever, and then run home and take care of her. And not 24 hours. I think it was more like maybe 18 hours or even fewer later, I learned that my aunt had passed away as well. When I talked to my cousin that next day when he called me to come for me, he says, you know what? He says, my mom passed away this morning. I got a call at 4 a.m. from the nursing home that she had passed. And I said, Mike, as tough as this is to hear, please understand that I know that your mom was suffering. I know that my mom was suffering. My dad came down to get my mom to take her to heaven. And when they saw your mom was suffering, when they got back up there, they asked God if they could come down and get your mom so she could join them as well. And that's where your mom is right now. She's with the two of them. And that was my explanation to him and my belief. It was a tough time, so we never really got a chance to put that together.
I mean, it's a tough time personally to go through, and then sort of an odd coincidence that you're sort of working on how to write someone a note for the exact situation you end up being in.
Yeah.
That it almost may, I mean, not that you ever want to say no to feedback, but when suddenly you're on the receiving end of those same notes, you pretty quickly figure out if you were giving the right advice all along. Yeah. And that's tough. And I'm sorry that sorry for your loss. On that note, I mean, we're getting ready to wrap up here anyway. And I think connecting to people on a personal level is important. And then obviously knowing that people have things going on, I'd say outside of their professional lives. As you said, you're still teaching, you're doing all your work, and then rushing home to take care of family. And I think the way you initially talked about starting a classroom is both important, but it probably also helps in those times, because when you're going into work, just like you said, you want your students to be comfortable and feel confident and supported. If that's really happening, then that also means that they're there for you in that same way. And that's why, to your point about the advice to young teachers, is to be a person. Because when you are a real person, you're being honest with your students, you're trying to be supportive. When we as teachers go through those times, I've always been struck by how supportive and mature my students can be. And sometimes the students who I would least expect it from end up being the ones who are the most helpful or understanding in those moments. And I think it's great. And I think that those things don't happen if you don't forge those relationships early on. Before we go ahead and wrap up here and end the recording, is there anything else that you would like to cover? I know we talked about the books and we talked about the award. Is there anything else that you want to get out there or say before we wrap up?
When I received the award from AMLE, I went to the cemetery and I went to every one of the family members at the cemetery and I thanked them. I like getting the kids outside of the classroom as much as possible, outside the box as much as possible. we're running right now an Inspiration Cafe. And the Inspiration Cafe is not a let's look at what you do for a living kind of get together. Everybody has career day. We do career day as well. We do it well. But this is what inspired you to take this direction in your career. We had David Wiesner, who is a Caldecott winner 3 times. We had Jocelyn Chadwick, who's a former NCTE president, a Harvard Graduate School of Education professor, and a worldwide expert on Mark Twain. We had someone from one of the local radio stations who's a former New York disc jockey. And we're always looking for provocative speakers. We're going to go ahead and do it online this year, one way or another. We want people to come in and talk to the kids and inspire them. Give them a story that kind of gets their blood going and says, you know what, I didn't get into it because I was looking at schedule or I was looking at money. I'm into this because it's my passion. It's what I do every day. I tell that to kids. They say, well, if you go into teaching, you're not going to make a whole lot of money. And there are people telling their kids, don't go into teaching. I say, you know what? You have to be happy. If you can be happy doing this, the money's not going to matter to you as much. It's going to matter, but not as much.
Yeah.
But if you really are going to be concerned financially, well, maybe then this might not be the exact career that you want to take. Maybe you want to take a different path. But if this is your passion, make sure that you do something even off your career. Maybe you're a businessman, get a job as an adjunct teaching a business course in a community college. Go out there and change some lives. I've been in 3 colleges. I've been in College of St. E., taught some graduate students who were pre-service. I've been in Centenary College, now University. I've been in Union County College. And I love what I do. And yeah, it's a heavy schedule. I teach at the Edison U. Wynn Learning Center. And that's a private concern that a colleague of mine who was an administrator and a teacher in New York City is doing now that he's retired. So on Sundays, I've tutored kids. I've helped them with their Common App essays. I've taught writing courses. And it's enjoyable. It gives me energy. So if it gives you energy, maybe you can get some supplemental income doing some things, but don't walk away from what will give you much satisfaction. Go there because that's the place you need to be. You won't be happy if you don't do the things you need to be.
That's well said. And I think, that you sort of hinted at that same idea when we first started this thing, talking about doing what you love and being passionate about it. And I think everybody listening to this can hear your enthusiasm and sincerity the whole way through. And it's infectious. And that's I think probably why you've had one of the reasons you've had a successful career as a teacher. And maybe one of the reasons that you have stuck with it longer than so many other people do. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And so as reminders to the audience, you can find links to the books, both by Joe's students and then the other recommendations, as well as a few additional notes and sort of a table of contents to navigate through the episode at classcastpodcast.com, or you can go through the web app at listen.classcastpodcast.com. We also stream on all major services. This has been episode 42 with Joe Pizzo, who is the 2020 National Educator of the Year from the named by the Association for Middle Level Education. And maybe we'll just link to your resume because I'm not going to have the web space to put it all up there. But an accomplished guy, and so there's a lot of great ideas in here, and I think a lot of things to help probably just educators in general, but specifically for younger teachers. I think there's a lot of great stuff here. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk and to share your insights.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to say to folks who are working with pre-service teachers or with young teachers, I'm on Twitter at Prof. J. Pizzo. So please reach out to me. I would love to Zoom or Google Meet with your class and talk to your students about things that I feel are important or things that they can do to be more successful. I do work during the school day, but I'm usually available after 2:30. So if you have a class that's a little later, I would be more than happy to do that.
Awesome. A wonderful resource. Joe, thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful 47th year in education. We'll see you later.
Thank you so much.